Good evening, everyone. Tonight we are going to be studying chapter 3 of Masechet Shabbos. The Mishna is going to begin with discussions about placing food on the fire before Shabbos or on Shabbos, and all of the relevant rules of this regard. Tonight's class is dedicated in loving memory of my dear mother Rivka Bas Harav Shloimeh. Let's jump right into the Mishnah. Kira shehisikuha bekash uvigvava. A kira is a double stove. It's laid on the ground. Fire goes underneath it, and there is place for two pots. Now, because there was place for two pots, which means there are two places for the heat to escape, this is not such an efficient way of heating of using the fire, which means it doesn't retain the heat as well as other types of ovens, etc. So says the Mishnah, Noisnim aleh tafshil. You can put a tafshil, you can put a cooked dish on it on Friday in order that it cook on Shabbos, and then you can remove it on Shabbos to have hot food on Shabbos. Of course, we know that there's a custom to eat hot food on Shabbos, and so you have to know how to prepare this food properly on Friday. So a kira, again, is a double stove. It's an inefficient way of retaining heat. It doesn't retain so much heat. And so therefore, you can put food on there if you have heated this oven with straw or with stubble. Now, what is the point here? You see, as we're going to make clear, the rabbis were concerned about heating ovens with different various fuels. There are certain fuels which they once you light them, they start to simmer down, and then they become coal. And then what happens is in an ordinary time, not Shabbos, of course, you stoke these coals, and the embers grow hotter, and it heats up your food. So in other words, when you stir it, it releases more heat. The rabbis were concerned about keeping food hot on Shabbos in certain ovens because one is likely to possibly forget that it's Shabbos, and they'll go ahead and stoke these coals. And if they're going to stoke the coals, that's, of course, prohibited on Shabbos. Cooking and increasing fire is, of course, prohibited on Shabbos. It's one of the Lamed Tes Melachos, one of the 39 prohibited categories that are prohibited by the Torah to perform on Shabbos. So now, when it comes to this kira, it's inefficient in keeping its heat. And so, it's not going to remain super hot on Shabbos. And we're talking about a case here, as we just said, that we're using only straw or stubble. Straw and stubble does not create coal and long-lasting embers that one is likely to stir on Shabbos. However, the gefes uve eitzim, if he used gefes is the remnants of fruit after the juices and oils have been squeezed out. So for example, if you squeeze out olives and you get out all the oil out of it, what's remained, the remnants of that, once it dries out, can actually be used for fuel. And this is not just with olives, but other fruits. Once the juice has been completely squeezed out, and it's dried, then it can be used as fuel for fire. So it doesn't last all that long, number one. And number two is it doesn't become embers and it doesn't become coals. So the worry and the concern that the rabbis had in certain cases that somebody's going to go ahead and stoke it to reflame it, to reignite it, is we don't need to worry about that, simply because it doesn't become embers. But gefes, straw and stubble don't become, but gefes does become, and as well as eitzim does become embers, and so therefore one cannot use this in a kira, which is again this double stove, except unless ad sheyigref, unless before Shabbos, so he lights it with the wood or he lights it with this mark, and before Shabbos, while it's still Friday and there's still a lot of heat in there, he scrapes away all the coals and he pushes it to the back or to the side, or he gets rid of it altogether. And so on Shabbos, if he was going to accidentally forget that it's Shabbos and go to stoke it, he'll see that it's all the way pushed in the back, it's not right there. Or alternatively, he can put on ashes over it. And so when you put on ashes over it, you'll be reminded, if you go to stoke it, you'll be reminded that it's Shabbos, and that's why you had put ashes over it. And so you will not come to stoke these embers. Beis Shammai says that all of this discussion that we're talking about here, whether or not you can go ahead and use a kira after the coals have been scraped to the side or scraped out altogether, or if you've put on ashes, is only in chamin. This only has to do with cold water. Water. You can heat up water there, because water doesn't really need slightly cooked and fully cooked water. It's the same water. You're not really cooking it. You're just making it hot. Water doesn't need additional cooking. It just needs additional heat to make it warm. Avaloi tavshel, but an ordinary dish which requires actual cooking, you cannot leave the food on at all. Even if one were to go ahead and scrape away and rake away, I should say, the coals, or alternatively put on the ash, even in such a circumstance, for regular food, according to Beis Shammai, you would not be able to use this kira for keeping food warm on Shabbos. Beis Hillel holds a more lenient view, and they say chamin v'tavshel. Once you scrape away and rake away the coals, or put on the ashes, you could put on water, or you could put on a cooked dish. Now, Beis Shammai, getting back to Beis Shammai, who of course, as we just said, only allows water to go on after you've taken the precautions of either raking aside the coals or putting on the ashes. Beis Shammai noitlin avalei machzirin. Beis Shammai, who limited the use of this kira oven, this double oven, for only hot water, he says you can only take the hot water off on Shabbos. But you can't return the hot water once you take off your kettle, you pour it into your coffee, you can't put it back, according to Beis Shammai. And again, this is even if, of course, when you have done the preparation of raking aside the coal or putting on the ashes. Beis Hillel says, whether it be the food or whether it be the water, you can remove it from the fire and you can you can remove it from this double stove, or you can put it back on. Now, of course, we all know in common practice, if you want to, this is the halacha, the law goes according to Beis Hillel in a kira oven, but you have to be holding the pot when you, for example, if you take a kettle or if you take a cholent off of this double stove, you have to be holding it in your hand. You can't put it down. And the reason for this is if you put it down and then somebody walks into the room, they would mistakenly think that you're taking an uncooked pot and you're putting it back on. You're putting it in the first instance on the oven, which is of course prohibited. So in order to forestall this, they only allow if you're holding the pot. So it's noticeable that you took it off. You're holding it with two hands, or with one hand really tightly if it has a handle. You take it out, you put some into a bowl, you cover the pot, and you put it back on. So let's summarize these halachas here. According to everybody, you need to rake away the coals or put on ash if you're going to be allowed to use the kira. Now, according to the Tana Kama and the Mishna, if you light up the stove with straws or splinters, they don't create straw or splinters, which does not create embers, then you don't have to rake away or put on the ashes. But if you use another types of wood or mark, which does create embers, you would have to first rake it away or put on the ashes before using it. That is according to everybody. Now, furthermore, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says we can only do this for water. And Beis Hillel says we can do this for water or for other dishes. Furthermore, Beis Shammai prohibits returning a pot of hot water onto the skira, and Beis Hillel is more lenient and says whether it's water or it's a cooked dish, one can put it back so long as they haven't put it down. They haven't put down the pot. So this is with the kira. All of this is with a kira, which is again, it's a stove which holds heat, but holds less heat than the following types of ovens that we're going to discuss. And so it has the most lenient ruling here. Tanner, Mishnah Beis, Tanner, an oven. So an oven is it doesn't have two places for the heat to escape. The heat actually stays in the oven. Maybe you have a small chimney, but it's designed for the heat. The ovens are designed to keep the heat inside. And so it gets more hot and as well as hold the heat longer. So now it's going to be a little bit more strict. An oven that was heated, that was fueled up and is burning on even kash ugvava, even with straw or gvava or with splinters. You can't put food or drink in it or on top of it. And the reason for this is because the heat is so intense. The heat is very intense. And so it's cooking, full-fledged cooking going on there. And once again, because it's so hot in there and it retains the heat, so what's going to happen is that we're afraid, even if right now you have straw and stubble there, we're afraid that it's going to retain the heat so long that the leftovers will still be, it's going to last a very long time, and the leftovers much later, it's a longer distance from when you lit it to till while it's still cooking, and we fear that you're going to rake even such a fire at a later point. So whether it's on top or whether it's on inside, we disallow using such an oven for heating food. Now kupach is a stove, is an oven that has like it's wide on bottom and it goes narrow on top. And so some of the some of the heat escapes. So it's as we're going to see, it's not as hot as a tanur, but it's less hot as a kirayim. It holds the heat less than a kirayim. So says the Mishnah, kupach, a single stove. Sikuhu v'kasha v'gvava. If you lit it with kash and gvava, hareze kichirayim. Then it's like a kirayim. Begefes uve'etzim, which means then that you don't have to scrape, you don't have to rake it aside at all. You could just use it as is. But if you use it begefes uve'etzim, hareyu ketaner, and you cannot use it at all. So the three levels is the kirayim, the tanur, and the kupach. Gimmel. Ein neistem beitza b'tzad ha'meicham b'shvil shetizgalgel. You can't take an egg, you're not allowed to take an egg and put it beside a hot kettle on Shabbos so that it is going to cook, slightly cook. Now, it's not directly on the fire, it's just next to the kettle. And again, this kettle, of course, is not on the fire, because if it was on the fire, so then you would, the heat source is, of course, the fire. So we're talking about you take a very hot kettle and you remove it from the stove, and now you put an egg next to it. So the rabbis forbade this, even though you're using these, it's not directly in contact with fire, it's only in contact with the hot kettle, but you're not allowed to do this. And again, this is a rabbinical prohibition. Now, I've never seen anything like this, but apparently they would take scarves, heat them up, and then remove them from the fire, and then crack an egg on these hot scarves, and it would cook the egg. Now, again, before we continue, I just want to clarify something. According to the Torah, the only type of cooking which is disallowed is cooking with fire. However, the rabbis added to that and saying that even something that's not cooked from fire, but only like, as we're going to see, derivatives, solar energy, it's not cooked from fire, it's heat that's generated some other way from the sun, from the heat of the sun or the heat of a hot spring. The rabbis forbade this. This is not prohibited from the Torah, but from the rabbis. Now, why? Because a person who sees the outcome of this, or a person who sees this, doesn't necessarily differentiate between cooking with fire and cooking with a derivative of fire, or a derivative of the sun heat. But cooking directly in the sun itself would be allowed according to the rabbis. So now, here, what happened is that this kettle, these scarves that we have were heated up with a fire. Now they're removed. So it's a secondary heat. It's not from the fire. It's been removed from the fire. You can't crack an egg on there and cook. Again, this is according to the rabbis. This is a prohibition from the rabbis. Rabbi Yossi allows such cooking. Again, heated scarves, removed from the fire, and cracking an egg on it. Further says the Mishnah, hot sand that became heated from the sun. Now we know, if you've ever taken a hike and gone near the water and there's sand, sometimes it's very, very hot, the sand. That sand could be hot enough to cook an egg. So you can't take an egg and bury it in hot sand on Shabbos. You could leave it above the sand for the sun to warm the egg directly. But once you put it in, it's a secondary source of the sun. And so even that, according to the rabbis, is prohibited. Or in the heat of the dust of the roads. In Africa or in wherever it is, in Desert Valley, in the desert, any desert, it gets very, very hot. The dust of the roads gets so hot that if you put an egg into it, it's a whole egg, it will cook. So says the Mishnah, you cannot put this egg in the dust or in the sand so that it will cook. Why? Because again, the rabbis have forbade using secondary heat from the sun. Direct heat from the sun, yes, because the observer sees it happening. Things that are buried, you don't necessarily know what heat source is beneath the ground. There are certain ovens that are beneath the ground, and a person may think that your heat source is beneath the ground, and it's fire. Mishna Daled. Maisa, there was a story, an incident. Sha'asu Anshi Tveria, ve'hinviu silon shel tzeinu l'seich am shel chamin. You've all heard of the hot springs of Tiberias, of Tveria. And so what they did is they took a pipe, and they put a pipe through these hot springs, and they put cold water into this pipe. And in this way, they can warm up the cold water. So again, there's no fire going on here. It's only a secondary form of heat. Nothing to do with fire. It's an alternate source of heat, I should say. The Chachamim said that the status of this water in b'Shabbos kechamin, shuchamu b'Shabbos. If on Shabbos, the status of the water, the cold water from the spring, the cold spring that's going through the hot spring, so when it comes out on the other side, on Shabbos, it's like water that was heated on Shabbos. What is the rule about water that's heated on Shabbos? Asurn b'retzicha, you're not allowed to wash yourself with it. Uveshasiya, and you're not allowed to drink from it. Only water that was preheated, that was put on the flame from before Shabbos, can one drink on Shabbos. But if it was put on the flame on Shabbos, one, of course, is not allowed to benefit from it. The Yom Tov, the status of this water, of this pipe, again, there's a cold spring, and it's feeding into a pipe that goes through a hot spring, so the water on the other side, B'Yom Tov, what is the status of this water on Yom Tov? Kechamin shu chamu b'Yom Tov. It has the status of water that was heated on Yom Tov. Asurin b'retzicha, one is, of course, one is not allowed to bathe in it. Umutarim b'shasiya, but you're allowed to drink from it. So just to clarify, the rabbis forbade bathing one's body in hot water on Yom Tov. One can take water that was heated on Yom Tov and wash their hands and wash their face and wash down, but you can't immerse into a bath on Yom Tov with water that was heated on Yom Tov. Mulyar Hagoruf. Mulyar, a milarium. This is a large bowl that was surrounded by a narrow compartment in which coal would be dropped in. And the lit coal would be dropped in, and then that lit coal would be insulated from the outside, and then within there was a secondary pot with water in it. So, says the Mishnah, if you had such a device, Hagoruf, which was cleared out before Shabbos, so then, Shoysein Hamenim b'Shabbos, then you can drink from this hot water on Shabbos. So again, let's just understand the case again. It's a pot that's surrounded by a second pot, and then there's a space in between which hot coals are dropped in. So if the coals are still there on Shabbos, then you can't use it on Shabbos. But if you remove the coals before Shabbos, so now you have just an insulated thermos. There's no live coals in there. The coals have been removed. So it's insulated like a thermos, I guess. You can use this on Shabbos and you can drink the water on Shabbos. But antichi, which is a vessel, which it was a double pot. It had a pot with a space for coals in middle and another space on bottom. Afal pishe gerufa, even though it was cleared, in sheis mimena, you can't drink from it on Shabbos, and the reason is because this is called hatmana, and you're insulating it, and it insulates it to such a great degree that the rabbis said it's almost as hot as if it would be on a fire, and so it's considered, rabbinically, it's considered rabbinically as a pot that's on the fire. And of course, there's no way to take this off the fire because there's no fire there in the first place. And so the rabbis didn't want people confusing this with heated water on Shabbos. Again, because of the superior level of heat, the person who's getting some water from that, you give it to them, they think that it came from the stove. Mishna Hey, Hamechem Shepinahu, a kettle that was removed from the fire. So it's a simple case. You have in our day and age, you have a blech, it's on the fire, and you take now the kettle off the fire. You can't put in a little bit of water into this kettle so that it becomes heated, because you're essentially cooking on Shabbos. You're not really cooking on Shabbos, because real cooking, according to the Torah, as we said before, is only when it's on the flame. Here you've removed it from the flame. But nevertheless, it's a secondary source of heat, and the rabbis forbade this, as we explained earlier. But you can put in a lot of water at one shot, so that all of this water becomes lukewarm. You're not cooking the water, you're just making it lukewarm. You're taking out the cold. So you're making it lukewarm now, so that's not considered cooking. Everything is not hot, everything becomes lukewarm. Or alternatively, you could put it and then, or you could put it into another cup, and that's so on the fire is kli rishon. This kettle is now off the fire and poured into a second cup, and that you can do because that reduces the temperature. Ha'ilpos, again, what we're concerned here in all of these cases is that even things that are not on the fire, but if they have a high level of heat, the rabbis are concerned that people who are served from these things will believe that it came from fire, and it's a marasayan type of situation. Because it's hard to differentiate between such hot foods or drinks and something that came from the fire itself. Ha'ilpos v'akdera she'aviran murtachin, a sealed pot or an ordinary pot that was removed from the fire while boiling. So let's say you have a pot of chicken soup, for example, and you have it on the blech, and you take it off the fire, off the stove. Lo yitin l'teichem tvolin. You cannot put spices in there. You can't put pepper and garlic or whatever spices you want to put in. But you can take it from this chicken soup, from this pot, and put it into another bowl, and then into the bowl you can put in the spices. Alternatively, if you have this chicken soup pot, you could take from the chicken soup, put from the pot into the bowl, and then put the spices, or you could take it and put it into a tureen, a serving bowl, and then do the same thing. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lakorlu neisin, you could put spices into any dish, except for something that contains vinegar or brine, because vinegar and brine will cause, even after you've removed it from the flame and put it down, and now take it from there and put it into a tureen or into a cup, a bowl, if it has vinegar or brine, this will cause it to cook the spices in any case. And so he disallows it. The law is not according to, the law does not go according to Rabbi Yehuda in this instance. Mishna Vav is going to be getting into muktzah. Muktzah means something that was set aside before Shabbos. A person diverted their intention from it. I'm not going to use this on Shabbos. Or it was being used for something that is prohibited on Shabbos, and so then afterwards it can no longer be used. It's muktzah. Muktzah literally means set aside. So now says the Mishnah, one may not put a little bowl under a olive oil lamp. lekabel beis hashemen, to collect the drips of oil that are coming down. So if you have a bowl with a wick and it's lit and the wick is in the bowl drawing the oil. So sometimes it draws a little bit extra oil and it drips from the wick. So if it's hanging over the bowl, somebody might want to put a bowl to catch this oil. Says the Mishnah, you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos. But if a person did this before Shabbos, mutter, he's allowed to do this. Why? Because again, this oil is muktzah, and we are not allowed to even save it from spilling over the side. But again, if we set up such a contraption before Shabbos, then it's fine. However, but you can't use that oil on Shabbos because that oil is muktzah. It's been set aside for the use of the candle, for the use of the flame. You cannot derive benefit from this oil on Shabbos because it's not prepared. Something is prepared is not muktzah. Something which is muktzah is not prepared. Metaltlin ner chodosh avalei yashan. Says the Mishnah, a new candelabra, a new lamp, can be moved around on Shabbos You can move a new lamp, but not an old one. So let's understand what's going on here. We have an earthenware lamp here, and it's never been used. So it's not all slimy and grimy from the oil and from the wick and so on and so forth. So now I have this in my house. I've never used it, and I want to use it. I want to use it. It's sitting in a place where I want to learn here. I want to study here, and it's in my way, so I can move it away, or I want to use it as a paperweight, for example. So it says the Mishnah that you're allowed to use it. It's not considered muktzah, set aside for only lighting purposes. Rabbi Shimon says, Kol haneres metalplin. Any lamp can be moved. Chutz min haner hadelik b'Shabbos, except a lamp that's burning on Shabbos. So why? Because then it's obviously muktzah. It was set, it was lit, and you removed your mind from it. It was used for a davar aser. It's used for something which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. It was only set up before Shabbos, and so therefore you can't move it once it had been lit once it was lit before Shabbos, even after it goes out. One may place a utensil. So if you have a lamp and you have a wick and it's giving out little sparks, if it's not a clear oil, so it doesn't burn so nicely and it spritzes out sparks. So you don't want to cause a fire. So what do? So you can place a utensil there to catch the sparks. However, you cannot put water in this vessel that you set to catch the sparks. You can't put water in there. Now, the novel thing here is that because it will extinguish it. Now, the novel ruling here is that not only can you not do that on Shabbos, but the rabbis forbade doing it even on Friday, which means you cannot set up a candle and then set up a vessel around it with water to catch the sparks, even if you do this on Friday. And this is a gezerah de Rabbanan, because this was going to later cause extinguishing of the sparks on Shabbos. So again, even on Friday, one is not allowed to do this. That is the end of our Mishnah study for today. Please join us next week at 8:30, chapter 4. Hopefully, I will not be broadcasting from my home. Hopefully, we'll be broadcasting from Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, and we'll be hosting anybody who wants to study Mishnah with us in Yerushalayim with the coming of Mashiach. All people who need a refuah shalema will have long healed, will be dancing and being happy, and the Beis HaMikdash, b'meir of Yameinu Mamish. Have a very good evening. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay strong. Be well.